This video is by Straight Goods News, SGNews.ca.
Well, I think what you have there is what is essentially a long-standing civil war, grievances that were set in motion actually during the colonial period. Mali underwent a transformation with the end of the Cold War, as many West African countries did, and they became more pluralistic, more open, more democratic. But like many countries, the inequality persisted and got worse as over the last 2 decades with the end of the Cold War. So that you have basically a country divided between the Arabic North and the more black African South. And there have been attempts to create a separate homeland in the northern part of the country many times over the last 20 years. And what's happened is that this simmering civil war that's essentially been going on in Mali has been infused with Islamic extremism, with Islamist organizations, Al-Qaeda affiliates working in the area have put common cause with the rebel cause. And sometimes they fight together, sometimes they fight each other. But they had a common enemy in the government that was based in the south and backed by the west. So what's happened over the last number of years, especially last year, the government and government forces faced a series of setbacks against the northern Tuareg people who were allied with these Al-Qaeda organizations of Islamist extremists. The military faced a number of setbacks. There was a coup last year. Aid was cut off. Number of cities started to fall as the rebel groups combined advanced. And then France sent in their military, sent out a call for heavy lift and other contributions, and Canada responded with deploying one of our most expensive and largest aircraft in the Air Force, a C-17, which is basically an enormous truck, flying truck. And so we have been involved there since then through a series of extensions. There may be other contributions as well that we're not aware of, but it's the C-17 aircraft that's the most highly visible contribution.
No. You've taken a position that Canada should be very cautious about its involvement in Mali. Why is that?
Well, I think that, my position was go slow on this. We took time and we talked to our supporters. We found that a majority of our own supporters were very supportive of providing aid and non-military assistance. I think they're very moved by the situation in Mali, as they are with many poor countries. They want to help, but they really drew the line at military involvement. I don't think that sentiment is too much different than the general public, and the government knows it. And I think that our position actually isn't that much different than John Baird's position, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, who at the committee just a couple of weeks ago, the Foreign Affairs Committee, said, look, we're not going to get into another Afghanistan at the drop of a hat. And what did he mean by that? Because he was drawing a connection between Mali and Afghanistan. And I think the point was, certainly the point that I understood it to be, was that the situation in Mali bears many of the hallmarks of the failed mission in Afghanistan. And I think people are right to be leery about Mali because of the ghosts of Afghanistan and our involvement there.
People like former kidnapped diplomat Robert Fowler, military historian Jack Granatstein are making the case that because Canada contributed to the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and the Islamist extremists obtained an awful lot of weapons from him, that Canada has an obligation to see things through and help root out the jihadists at our own peril if we don't. How do you respond to that argument?
Well, we've had a lot of connections there, not just through that, but that's certainly true, that when NATO went in and did the no-fly zone, which is a bombing campaign in Libya, it caused chaos, and weapons were looted from the arsenals that went unprotected, and there was a direct line from those advanced weapons to the Tuaregs and some of the Al-Qaeda affiliates that were there, that were that were involved in the Libyan conflict. The Tuaregs, which is the northern people in particular, were on the side of Gaddafi. So these weapons have spread everywhere throughout the whole region, and has caused tremendous insecurity. So yes, the pro-war right will say, we broke it, therefore we own it. We bear responsibility for Libya and releasing all these weapons, therefore we have to keep fighting. I think an equal argument can say, look, we warned you about Libya because of unintended consequences that always happen when we get in these conflicts. There's always unintended consequences. And here is yet another example of one. We're not going to make things worse by sending even more troops, more soldiers, more arms to that region. So I think the argument can cut either way.
Isn't there a huge security risk from the jihadists if they get established in Mali?
Well, this is what they commonly refer to all the time. Better to fight them over there than to fight them over here. And that, George Bush used to make this argument that homeland defense involved, Iraq and whatnot. And so essentially,
the old domino theory, basically.
I mean, yeah, it goes back to Vietnam. So, defending the homeland means invading someone else's homeland. I think this goes back to even before Vietnam. But you have to be careful about that because you can get bogged down. And I think this is what Baird was saying. If we just, it's very easy to slip into these conflicts. We immediately go for the first tool that we have available, which is armed intervention. And we think that that's the way to go. Well, the problem is if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem starts looking like a nail, when really maybe what you need is a screwdriver or something like that. So we keep going for this and invoking these unintended consequences. And have we not learned anything from a half generation in Afghanistan, billions spent, dozens and dozens of people killed? We're basically at the end of that conflict and have very little to show for it.
What have we learned then from Afghanistan, and what would be a smarter course in Mali than getting involved immediately in military intervention?
Well, when the pro-war lobby and Jack Granatstein challenged us in the newspaper for not being supportive enough of the conservatives' mission in Mali, of course that was before Baird's comments, so I'm not sure where Jack Granatstein fits now. He'll probably change his position again to fit the government's latest talking points. But what we said in our response is that, look, if you compare Mali to Afghanistan, it's right. There are a lot of comparisons. Even Time magazine declared Mali Africanistan in trying to draw these links. But one of the things that we should have learned is that we have to be careful about getting involved in civil wars because that's what's happening. That was what was happening in Afghanistan. That's what's happening in Mali. These civil wars are now being infused and intertwined with Islamic extremists. And sometimes it cuts different ways. And certainly that's the case in Mali. There's at least 3 different Islamic organizations, rebel organizations, sometimes fighting together, sometimes fighting against one another, sometimes fighting with other ethnic groups. So it's a very complex situation. It's not black and white. Also, which side would we be on? Because if the French right now are backing a government that is the result of a coup, it's a puppet president that was put in by a military coup. When the coup occurred last fall, Canada cut off aid. Are we now sending military aid to help this government that we cut off aid just a few months ago? So that doesn't make any sense either. So I think there's lots of lessons to look at here. And even though the French over recent weeks have been able to have a military victory over a number of those cities, we're now starting to see what? Roadside bombs. Soon we'll see suicide attacks. It'll have all the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda and Islamist insurgencies that we have seen, and this is going to turn into another ongoing counterinsurgency mission.
What would be a better course?
Well, it's I think definitely there's a food crisis going on there. There's many thousands of people are internally displaced within the country. Certainly there's an aid mission there, and I think that is the right way to intervene. There is an African contingent of troops going in from different countries. So certainly this is a regional situation that I think could be supported. And one potential game changer would be a UN peacekeeping operation, which seems to be sort of hovering around the outside. France has talked about it. The UN has been investigating it, and this is still unfolding now. If there were to be a UN peacekeeping operation, depending on the terms of that, I think Canada might be called on to make a contribution to that. So we'll have to see how that unfolds. There's certain criteria that have to be met first in order to have a UN peacekeeping operation. It's a completely new conversation, but that could be a game changer. And then we'll have to take an assessment at that time.
Has there ever been a UN peacekeeping operation in a case of jihadist insurgents?
Well, I think I would have to defer to someone with a little more expertise on the variety of all the types of operations. But there's many variety out there in terms of the kinds of missions and many of them, as time has shown since the end of the Cold War, have been very successful. We always often hear about the many failures of UN peacekeeping operations. But there have been a number of very successful operations that have gone on in the last 20 years, and they are improving as time goes on. So it would no doubt be a challenge, but I think there is a basic framework there that could be employed. It would most undoubtedly be a sort of what you would call, I think it's more of a peace enforcement kind of thing. There could be the risk of a combat mission there. That's true. But I think you would have to sort of wait and see and make a determination based on what the UN was proposing to do at the time.